Welcome to the B Block Podcast. I am your host, Brandon Scott. I appreciate you for being here, especially if you're here after a way too long delay. And I want to apologize for the delay up top. We don't have to get into all of the nitty-gritty details of why there's been such a long delay. Because honestly, I feel like that will bore you. I don't feel like you came here to hear my excuses and hear for the sob story and like all of the background on why it's been so long since we did a podcast. I've been on a really good run since I started really taking the podcast seriously early this year of being regular. And honestly, one of the things that helped with that was the partnership with Foolish Club Media. If y'all follow the podcast or follow me, you know that I'm in business now with my guy running the show, Hughley, and what they're doing over there with Foolish Club Media. He's got the Nightly Fix, a show that they do every night, him and Steve Acerta and my guy Osita, and a few others that are part of Ron's Kansas City crew. But we came together and we got this little podcast network going, and ever since I partnered up with them, I've been a lot more consistent with the podcast, and we had a bunch of stuff come up over the last month or so that made it real difficult to make this happen. But I am glad to say that we are back. And now that I've spent the first couple of minutes discussing us being back and welcoming the audience back to the B Block Podcast. And by the way, make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast. Make sure that when you're finished listening, that you rate and review the podcast. And I'd appreciate it if you told a friend about the podcast as well. But what I want to do on this episode, and since we're back regular, I will mention that later in the week, we will do some stuff on the Astros because we got some, I was just talking to my guy, Tyler Milner, T-Mill, producer of The Drive over Sports Radio 610, about just the added juice. He was in the building at Dyken Park on Monday night when you had all of the returns with Christian Javier coming back from Tommy John surgery, Carlos Correa's first game back in Houston since being traded back from Minnesota to the Astros. And of course, the big one as well was Alex Bregman's first game back in Houston as an opponent with the Boston Red Sox. And he did start the game with a 2-run homer. The Astros won that game, but we were talking about how there's just added juice to the Astros and the baseball season, and that's something that I do want to talk about with y'all later in the week. We'll get into a little bit of college football as well, but I want to spend this episode on the Texans because the last time that we talked, it was going into training camp. Training camp was just starting. Now we are a few weeks into training camp. So we haven't talked since, practice, too many practice observations, maybe the earliest ones, but not too many practice observations. Certainly not any observations from the first preseason game against the Minnesota Vikings. We're doing this, a day and a half or so ahead of joint practices between the Texans and the Carolina Panthers. They're, of course, going to host the Panthers this weekend in their second preseason game, which should be entertaining and actually worthwhile because we anticipate that some of the important players are going to actually get some run. So you'll get to glean some things from that game, from this upcoming game that you weren't necessarily able to from the preseason opener. So we're going to talk about all of that, but I want to just kind of catch us up on where I'm at in terms of Texans training camp / preseason observations so far, because I do have a few. And I also want to just qualify, since most people that follow me and that kind of know my role and position in the Texans media landscape, in previous years, I've been a lot more present at practices, in locker rooms, at media availabilities. I'm normally one of the regular voices that you hear at these places. And things have changed a little bit for me in terms of my role at the places that I work, like the work that I actually do. that not only doesn't require me to be on site for some of these things, but actually requires me not to be, requires me to be either in the office or at an office at a desk doing something that to where I can't be in the field as much as I used to, which is a little bit of a disappointment because I do like being in the field and I think I'm strong in the field. And more so than that, like I really just, like I said, I enjoy the camaraderie with the fellow media, obviously the chase for information and kind of just being there on site and being able to observe things. I think is really important to what we do overall. So like I value that and I miss that part of it, but I'm just being frank about it. I make a lot more money now doing what I do, doing it the way that I do it now, and like the sacrifices, the positives are much more greater than the negatives. Like the good much more so outweighs the bad in this case for me. So I went on that spiel just to say I have not been at the majority of these practices physically. I have been to, I believe, two, maybe three training camp practices so far. I do plan to be at the joint practice on Thursday. I'm not going to make it Wednesday. We're doing this on Tuesday night, recording this episode on Tuesday night. I wasn't able to make it Tuesday, wasn't able to make it Wednesday, not going to be able to make it Wednesday. We'll be there on Thursday for training camp practice. And also we'll be in for, I think, Ron or maybe Clint. I'm going to be on the drive with either Ron or Clint. Whichever guy is out, I'm in for him, and I will be with whoever is in. So I forget which one, you have to forgive me, but I'll be on the drive on Thursday and Friday. That'll be really cool because I'll get to go to practice early in the day. And then the show will be a great deal of the show will be a lot of our observations from the joint practice between the Carolina Panthers and the Houston Texans. And look, maybe I'll get into this a little bit later. Maybe this will be something for another episode, but I do want to make the case for these joint practices having just as much, if not more value. Straight up, the training camp joint practices having more value to the teams than the preseason games, just based off of how they approach the practices. That's a topic for another day, just kind of updating y'all on kind of what the workflow is, and like, and this is important too when I talk about being more of a house cat. While I am not on site as often as I used to be, basically every word that is reported at these training camp practices comes through me in some kind of way, like in the role that I have at Houston Chronicle, the role that I have at Sports Radio 610. There is not a word uttered at that training camp practice, anything that's reported to the public, that I don't see just as a part of what I do. So even though I'm not there, I'm just as connected as I would be if I was, except for not being able to observe these things from my own two eyes. Like the injuries, and we'll get to these a little bit later, because I do want to talk about the impact of the Brevin Jordan and C.J. Gardner-Johnson injuries. The two totally different levels of severity we're talking about with these injuries, but both emotional scenes and noteworthy moments at Texans training camp over the last couple of weeks. I want to hit on those a little bit later. But I was not there. I was not at the Greenbrier in West Virginia. I was not at NRG when, at the Houston Methodist Training Center when this happened to Brevin Jordan, this knee injury. So I'm not seeing these things with my own two eyes, but everything that's being reported is coming to my desk and kind of, I don't want to say going through me because that's kind of overplaying it, but I get a look at everything. And not just because I'm interested and I follow it. I'm such a big fan. It is work. It is part of the job. So that's just worth noting. People think, oh man, is he just doing a podcast like a fan and not really still working in the media and really covering, or is he just kind of pop up on the radio and just do this podcast? Now I'm still in the trenches, just not on site. If that makes sense. So with that being said, I do want to talk about some of these observations or where I'm at based off of, again, not being at the training camp practices, but consuming pretty much everything that's reported out of there, and and also just generally being interested in all of it, and kind of weighing it with what I was either concerned with or interested in going into training camp. So I want to start with my concern for the Texans offense. And I don't want this to come off as overreactionary, but this is to me a legitimate concern based off of what I am anticipating the offensive identity and makeup and attitude and approach to be under this new offense with Nick Caley in his first year. Some of what they want to do schematically and just in terms of an approach, right? Like, I think that this is an offense that clearly is going to want to run the ball. We saw in the first preseason game where Dario Gumawale did a really good job running the ball early in that game. And you got to imagine that if they get a healthy Joe Mixon, that they're going to want to feed Joe Mixon and they're going to want to run the football and establish. And more so than just wanting to run the football, I think it's more so about establishing a certain level of physicality and imposing a certain level of will on the defense so that they can open up that passing game and hit those opportunities when they're there. Now, I think it's going to, when I say hit those opportunities, I do think it's going to be, you're going to see some short passes, some dink and dunk, some stuff with guys out of the backfield. And look, it's just going to be a different offense in that kind of way. But one thing that I do anticipate is that they're going to be a run. I don't want to say run first because I think that'll scare people a little bit in today's NFL. Like, I don't really know how, unless you're like the Baltimore Ravens, for example, and maybe even to some degree, you could say in certain weather, Buffalo is this way. But like, very few teams I feel like are run first. I think maybe the Eagles. There are some teams that you can look at and say, man, their calling card really is running the football and imposing their will. But even those teams, you don't necessarily think about as run first because they got celebrated quarterbacks who are running quarterbacks, but also can do some damage with their arms. Like, the reaction to run first is for one, like an overreaction. I think a lot of times they're like, oh, they can't throw the ball. They don't want to throw the ball, and then it's almost like it's a knock on the quarterback a little bit. So, and also I just don't know if you can actually be run first. There's just kind of the way the game is played now. It's hard to really kind of really look at teams that way. So run heavy run emphasis, wanting that to be a huge part of their identity, I think is probably a fairer and better way to characterize it. But I do think that that's something that they're going to want to do a lot of. Like, this is not going to be one of those teams that we've seen in the past where the Texans can't run the ball, and so they end up relying on their passing game and trying to establish some kind of short game as like a supplement for their run game, like, or just be pass heavy. I cannot see this offense being that way, especially early on. They're going to try to establish the run. Now, so my concern is not that they're going to be a run heavy, a run focused offense. I think that part of it is just fine. My concern is who they're going to do that with and how exactly they're going to make that happen. Because look, if you can tell me that the Texans are going to have a healthy Joe Mixon for the bulk of the season, if not all of it, the majority of the season, the heart of the season. You can tell me that the Texans are going to have a healthy Joe Mixon when the season starts, when they open the season. All right, when the Texans open the season against the Rams, when the Texans have their first home game on Monday Night Football against the Tampa Bay Bucks, if you could tell me that Joe Mixon is going to be healthy then, or just simply that Joe Mixon is going to be healthy at some point and healthy for the majority of the season, this ain't that big of a concern for me. I actually like the idea of kind of changing the identity a little bit, and you got enough faith in the quarterback to where you don't feel like the quarterback is limited. You got the guy at quarterback if you need to pass the ball or want to pass the ball, whatever it is. Like, you should have a passing game with C.J. Stroud as your quarterback, and I do think they got enough weapons to make a passing game work. But hey, we're gonna really commit to the run and be the type of team that, like, the other team just don't want to deal with, just gets tired of, because they're forcing us to tackle. We're forcing them to tackle all the time, and like, it's just like the whole run thing. I know people get, maybe not some of the most hardcore football heads, but people get kind of tired of watching it, or bored by it or whatever. But it's like, man, that really imposes a level of physicality that, like, if you're an athlete, okay, and you're in shape, you're strong, you're fast, whatever. Like, most of these guys would rather run than hit. Like, especially the duration of a football play. What does it last? 6, 7 seconds, 8, 9 seconds, however long the play lasts. It's not that long to run. And so I feel like a lot of these guys would rather run than, in 6 to 8 to 9 second bursts, than to be forced to tackle and hit and bruise their own bodies by trying to bruise yours on a consistent basis. So that's why I am cool with having and not just cool with, but in support of having a credible run game. Like, it's just pretty simple. It's a physical game. This imposes physicality. You should do it. But my concern is, what if Joe Mixon is not healthy? What if Joe Mixon is limited? What if the Texans have to rely on the rest of the guys in that running back room more than I think they have intended to, and more than I'm pretty sure that the majority of the Texans fan base is comfortable with? Because here's the thing, like I said, you tell me that you got a healthy Joe Mixon and you want to be a run-focused team, and you change the identity, you change the offensive line to where this is their strength. The offensive coordinator believes, everybody believes, the quarterback, everybody believes in it. Okay, but Joe Mixon, I cannot separate or forget that they ran Joe Mixon into the ground last year. Okay, a dude that already had a ton of miles on him. Ran him into the ground last year because they didn't feel good enough, clearly didn't feel good enough about their backup running back situation for him as a more experienced and veteran back to share the load. Right. So it was a lot of Joe Mixon. And then he even had, with the hip drop tackle that he suffered, I believe, against the Bears, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe it was, I could be forgetting now. But whenever that hip drop tackle happened, he missed some time. And, there was not another back like him. They didn't have another back like him. And when he was out there, I felt like they ran him into the ground, and possibly did that out of necessity. Okay. So a big part of this year for me, this offseason and subsequently the actual season, was finding a credible alternative to Joe Mixon, a running back who could spell Joe Mixon and at least shoulder some of the burden, share some of the workload with an aging but still really good and really effective Joe Mixon. I just feel like if you want to get the best out of this guy, which is really, really good, okay, not to be confused, the best out of this guy is really, really good. You can't run him into the ground like he's 23, like he's 24. He's not. He's closer to 30 now. He's been playing he's been playing and he's been in the NFL since he's like 21. This is a dude with a lot of tread on the tire. You want to get the best out of him. You need other options. And so that's where the Dameon Pierce question comes up. That's where the Nick Chubb signing is a fascinating proposition if he can channel some version of the Nick Chubb that we all know or knew. That's where the drafting of Woody Marks is intriguing, because it's not that you think that he's going to be, an every down back, but he can carry the ball here or there, and he's a different type of option as a pass catcher out of the backfield. Adds a new element, a different dynamic to the offense. So like all of these things coming together, you're like, oh, maybe Joe Mixon don't have to do everything as the running back. But then, so like they run him into the ground, and then we get into the offseason, and Joe Mixon has not been healthy basically at any point this offseason. Like we haven't seen the guy. Hadn't seen him in the earlier training activities that they had, right? The OTAs and minicamp. The word back then was that he had been in a walking boot. Haven't seen him, hasn't been able to perform during training camp. And we don't have really a clear picture for what his status is and just where he's going to be at. And then it's hard to imagine that he's just going to arrive. He's just going to show up week 1, week whatever it is, and just be ready to go, like just good as new. That's something that I'm just not willing to either bank on or take for granted. So you got a Texans team, a new Texans offense that clearly wants to run the ball and be a run-heavy, run-focused team. But to me, you've got some questions at running back. Like Dare Ogunbowale ran his heart out in that preseason opener, and we all know Dare's role, and I think respect and value Dare Ogunbowale for what he is, a special teams ace type, a really good special teams player is maybe a better way to put it, plus a guy that can take a few carries for you. But like that, your main option at running back, and maybe even your second option at running back, needs to be something a little bit more dynamic than that, with all due respect to Dare Ogunbowale. And so who's that going to be? Okay, we mentioned Joe Mixon's injury issues going into the season. That's hard to rely on. So is their number one running back going to be Dameon Pierce? Oh, by the way, he was injured up until recently, and it's kind of being eased back into things. So is your number one running back going to be Dameon Pierce? Is Dameon Pierce going to be your number 2 running back? Okay, so now I've gone over your top 2 running backs who both have injury questions, and one of them has had, like, honest to God, performance questions. And kind of in one of those years, like a prove it type of year. What is his role? What is his lot in life? So, and then Nick Chubb, who maybe you could argue I should have mentioned before Dameon Pierce, because if he's anywhere close to the Nick Chubb of old, then our questions are answered here. You've got Nick Chubb, some version of Nick Chubb. But the issue with that is we haven't seen anything yet from Nick Chubb that indicates he's Nick Chubb. Like, he's kind of just been another running back in the room so far. Okay, now to be fair, we're talking mostly practice and a player who's coming off 2 back-to-back serious injuries, and also just doesn't probably need a whole bunch of practice. Doesn't really need to probably prove himself at practice. Like, he's that established and respected of a player to where, like, he needs to be out there working and not dogging it. And obviously he's a good worker, and everybody respects him, so that's not an issue. But like, he doesn't have to wow you at practice or have all of these like great performance. I'm pretty sure they're monitoring his speed and his workload and all of that kind of stuff with their sports science and all of that, because they're tracking and all of that kind of stuff. But it's not like you need to see him set practice on fire to like believe in Joe Mixon. I'm sorry, to believe in Nick Chubb. But that being said, the word is that for the majority of time, Nick Chubb has looked decidedly ordinary at practice. And the best practice that he was having at training camp was the one where kind of went down with an injury and then missed some time, some practice time. And, as of this week, it looks like he's back out there from what I can tell. Monday, he kind of had the non-contact jersey. And by Tuesday, he was back to contact and like all is well. And D'Amico Ryans talked about this last week, saying that Chubb will be back with him. But it's just a reminder that all you can really be until proven otherwise is hopeful with Nick Chubb, but you can't really bank on that. You can't really, even if he makes the team, which I anticipate he will, especially if he's healthy, you can't bank on like Joe Mixon's got an issue with Joe Mixon. Like this, the same question, and he maybe even more so with Nick Chubb. So an offense that wants to run the ball with three running backs who are all either injured or have underperformed or both. In the case, unfortunately, with Dameon Pierce, who I think is maybe getting a little bit too much of I don't want to seem like I'm being too harsh on him, but we all understand the question with Dameon Pierce and some of the drop-off that he had in the previous system where he wasn't as good as he was as a rookie in the system that they ran in his rookie year. So, like, it's a proven year for him in some ways, and these other two guys are older. All of them are injured. What does this offense that wants to run the ball so badly look like if the running backs that you're expecting to perform are not able to do so? I'm concerned about that. Now, that's the negative. The positive is that I have been able to sell myself on this offensive line over time. And I think everybody that has followed the Texans that has a reasonable mind has like reasonable concern, at the very least reasonable concerns about the Texans offensive line. And if for no other reason, just the fact that they redid it, they remade it, they changed our offensive line coach. They got rid of 3/5 of their starting offensive line from last year, brought in new guys, drafted a new guy, a tackle pretty high who looks like he's going to start. They've got second-round picks from the last 2 years or from the previous two drafts, both of which look like they are backups now. One of them even a backup at a different position from what they drafted him to be. So, yeah, I mean, the questions about the offensive line are all very valid. It's the reason why C.J. Stroud's reputation took a hit. I thought very, very little fault of his own. And mostly due to just what I've called countless times just the calamity around him. That's a big part of why people aren't viewing C.J. Stroud as like the second coming the way they were after his rookie year. He's just kind of another good quarterback now, as opposed to being like the future. I still view him that way, but he's just not talked about that way, or as of right now. And I think it's in large part because of the offensive line. They remade it. It's something we've been watching all training camp, and I'm starting to sell myself on it, right? Like, so before Cam Robinson got injured, who's their left tackle free agent acquisition, the guy that it appeared that they signed to replace Laramie Tunsil. Not as good as Laramie Tunsil, but experienced enough to go out there and play a decent level left tackle for you. It looked like it was going to be Cam Robinson at left tackle, Laken Tomlinson at left guard, Jake Andrews or Jared Patterson fighting it out for center, Titus Howard at right guard, and the rookie, Ariante Ursery, the rookie out of Minnesota, at right tackle. With Cam Robinson injured, and it's possible that the Texans discover a combination that is better somehow. I think that's entirely possible that they discover a combination that's better without Cam Robinson. which I look, I don't think that that's going to happen, but I think it's possible because this doesn't look too bad either. And that's some combination from left to right of Ariante Urshery at left tackle, Lakin Tomlinson at left guard. Again, Jake Andrews and Jared Patterson fighting for that center spot. It's probably going to be Jake Andrews, it seems like, with those are the two guys, the two options. Ed Ingram at right guard, and then Titus Howard bumping over back to tackle, which is where he's played the majority of his career when they're not yo-yoing him, and the position he was playing when he got his contract extension, when he first got his contract extension. So I know there are some people that believe that Titus is their best tackle. I don't necessarily believe that, but I do believe he's, just as capable of playing tackle as anybody else that they got on the team. Laremy Tunsil's gone. They don't have any stars at any of the offensive line spots, any of the offensive line positions, not a single star. But I'm starting to buy into it because, like in large part, because Ariante Urshery looks like the real deal. Looks like he's gonna start either at left tackle or right tackle. Like if Cam Robinson's healthy, maybe they bump him back over to right. Maybe if Cam Robinson's healthy, he becomes their swing tackle and they leave Ariante Urshery at left tackle since that's where he played the majority of his college career. That's what he was drafted as. Titus Howard's been comfortable at right tackle. And if Lakin Tomlinson and Ed Ingram are serviceable enough at guard, that just might be the look. Cam Robinson just might be a $12 million insurance policy this year for one of those other two tackles. I am starting to buy into it. I don't think this is going to be a great offensive line, but from what I've seen and observed from the reporting, from training camp, from the few offensive linemen that I saw out there obviously Urshery played in the game in the preseason opener, and you had some of the backups out there, saw a little bit of the backups. Like I feel like the whole, getting everybody playing with a different mentality, a different attitude, a different togetherness, and with better communication, better understanding for the assignments. I think that could work. I've always thought that it could work, but now, like, they needed to prove some things once they got on the field. Now that we've gotten to see it a little bit in training camp and gotten to see it a little bit, in a preseason game, I'm starting to sell myself on it. And that's even given the fact that they've mostly been getting their asses kicked at these practices. Like, they're getting their ass handed to them. If you believe any of the reporting, anything of what you heard and what you've seen, it's been from like up front and really just overall, it's been advantage defense for the Texans in this training camp. But what you're also seeing is like a constant improvement and like better reports about the offensive line as the time goes on. Like it seemed like they maybe turned some kind of corner last week when they were at the Greenbrier in West Virginia. Even though they weren't necessarily winning every day, it seemed like the offensive line and the pockets that you hear about C.J. Stroud having at practice is a lot cleaner. And the operation, the operation, it seems like, at least from what I can tell, is just operating a lot smoother at practice with the offensive line. So I am buying into it, or cautiously optimistic about the offensive line. I ain't necessarily going to try to really sit here and sell you on why you should believe in this offensive line, because I think any level of skepticism is valid, warranted, and I'm not here to knock it. I'm just letting you know where I'm at. That at this point in the season, when there is like, only but so much reason to be pessimistic, and you try to find reasons to be optimistic, based off of what I've seen, the Texans' offensive line not going to be great, but could potentially not be terrible as it's been over the last couple of years. Now, another thing I want to talk about is my increased excitement for this rookie class, man. I am geeked about this Texans rookie class. I am geeked about it, especially seeing what I'm seeing from Ariante Ursery. Like I'm the guy that says, hey, Nick Caserio's done an incredible job drafting. The Texans overall have done an incredible job putting their team together over the last couple of years. But for whatever reason, they can't be trusted to draft offensive line. They can't be trusted to draft offensive linemen. They can't be trusted to put offensive lines together. They, up until now, perhaps, and the jury, I guess, is still out, they can't be trusted to coach offensive linemen. Like, as an organization, as a label, as a crew, the Texans have earned the reputation of a group that the trust is lacking on how they go about putting together and coaching offensive line. Specifically the draft picks. I just mentioned the last two offensive linemen that they picked in the second round prior to Ariante Ursery were a tackle in Blake Fisher, who seems like is not even getting backup consideration these days. And then Juice Scruggs, who was drafted to be a center and really is built like a center, but can play guard, is like a backup guard now. And not a backup guard to like prime Zach Martin, but like perhaps the backup to Ed Ingram, a castaway from the Minnesota Vikings. I don't mean to disrespect Ed Ingram. And maybe this is just, the change of scenery and the coaching that he gets here makes him a much better player. And maybe, I don't know, but that's not, that's not a competition that you can't reasonably expect a second round pick to win. I understand that Ed Ingram himself was a second round pick, but he's now a backup at a different position. So you got those two offensive linemen that they've drafted. You've got the whole, the Titus Howard thing, like, is probably more of a credit to Titus Howard that they feel like they can move him along the offensive line the way that they have. But it hasn't felt good, or like it's felt like Titus Howard has served as their remedy for desperation when they find it. We don't know what we're gonna do at guard. We got Titus Howard. Paid him at tackle. Like, we're gonna move him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That I've had an issue with that over the years. Even though it's a credit to Titus Howard for being able to play multiple positions. Obviously, the Laramie Tunsil thing, people feel the way that they feel about that, but that's the best offensive lineman that they've had since Dwayne Brown. So like, it's just for a team that has put as much money and resources, whether that's trades, draft capital, extensions. They've done all of these things to address the offensive line, and it's been the way that it has. There's a reason to be skeptical when they draft an offensive line. And so I was, as big as Ariante Ursery is, and as much as people liked him in Minnesota, I was like, the Texans drafted him. I don't know. Must be something wrong. And something is wrong. And that's me. I'm wrong. It feels like, okay, I know they ain't even played a game yet, right? A real game. But based off of what we've seen so far at practice, the limited of what's been seen in practice and what we saw from Ariante Ursery in the first Texans preseason game, he looks the part. he looks the part, and they've already shown a level of confidence in him. I don't feel like they just anointed him the job or just given him the job. I think they've gone out there and seen what they got and said, "Hey, man, this is part of what we got, and he's one of the best at what we got." At least attack one of their feels like he's one of their two best tackles. You need two tackles, and he's top two, maybe not two. And the question is, who's there with him? Who's the other top two tackle? Is it Titus Howard or is it Cam Robinson? How long is Cam Robinson hurt? Because that'll matter. Because clearly they feel like their best three tackles are some combination of Ariante Ursery, Cam Robinson, and Titus Howard. Blake Fisher does not appear to be in that conversation. Who they signed, man? I have to pull it up. McDermott. But I think they're gonna like the rookie and one of those vets. Robinson on the right, Titus on the right with the rookie on the left. I like that combination better. So that's got me with an increased excitement for the rookie class because, hey, you got an offensive lineman that looks like he's going to start for you and perhaps be part of the solution to your offensive line problems. That's already on top of feeling like, I've said this before, that Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel are going to be able to contribute right away for the Texans. I've thought that since the very beginning, and that feeling has only been validated by watching them in training camp and in that preseason game. Feeling's only been validated. I think with Higgins is the one I feel like I'm kind of taking for granted because it's not even Texan specific. I just think that he's kind of got the total package of size, mobility, like he moves well enough, is big enough, and catches the ball well enough to where Jaden Higgins would be a useful player in any offense on any team in the league. Like, just he feels like the most plug and play guy that the Texans drafted, and so no surprise, potentially the most plug and play and the highest ceiling. So it's no surprise that was their first pick, but that was the guy that they went and got. And so for me, maybe I'm even taking him for granted, but I'm incredibly excited for him just because I'm assuming that he's going to be good, useful, and productive for them right away. And Jalen Noel, we talked about all this before when they drafted these guys. But Jalen Noel is showing, like, the thing that impressed me about him in that preseason game was that he's not just fast, but he's slippery. Like a smaller dude, he's strong, that can break tackles a little bit in the open field. Like, I think that this is going to be a guy that's going to be on the field for them a lot and is going to get open a lot. It's going to see like plenty of targets, just a whole new element to their offense that they didn't have, right? I've talked about this before, but the speed, there's just an added speed element with this guy that I don't think they've had. I know a lot of people think about Tank Dell, but Tank Dell is a little bit more sudden, quicker out of breaks, precise route runner, like a very unique kind of player in that way with speed. But this guy is just kind of more of a track guy. But not a track guy, a football player for sure, because he is not as easy to bring down as he might look for his size. So incredibly excited about that. Jalen Smith, okay. Jalen Smith, I don't know, like, I just know the last USC defensive back that they drafted was Kalen Bullock the year before, and I felt good about that then. And they kind of talk about this guy, not, I would say, the same, because they play positions, but similar. It's just a guy that yeah, I don't know. I don't know what happened there. Hopefully it doesn't look like we lost the podcast, but I don't know. We've gone 47 minutes now, and I'm having technical issues, so we don't lose the podcast. I'm gonna try to go ahead and wrap this up. I want to kind of take my time with some of these thoughts. Maybe this is the dead giveaway of the issues that I've been having with doing a podcast over the last couple of weeks, but I am excited about the Texans rookie class. Let's suffice it to say that. Is that fair enough to say? I am even more excited about the Texans rookie class today, a few weeks into training camp, as they go into these joint practices with Carolina Panthers, as they go into their second preseason game against the Carolina Panthers. I am even more excited about the impact that the rookie class could have. I honestly think that this could be, they have a chance to be the most impactful rookie class the Texans have ever had. That's if you grade on the curve of, I don't think that they're going to have a player that is as good as great as the best players that they drafted. So like J.J. Watt, the drafts, the 2011 and 2003 drafts where they draft J.J. Watt, draft Andre Johnson. You can argue those are more impactful because those guys are at the top. The 2023 draft when they draft Will Anderson Jr., when they draft C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson Jr. I know Tank Dell is in that draft, and unfortunately, we kind of see what's going on with his career, with the injuries and everything. But like that had the potential to be, not the potential. That's probably their most impactful draft right there because you got two guys that look like they could be franchise cornerstones for a long time, a decade or more. But in terms of like the depth of it, like not having that top end guy per se, but the guys at the top, super impactful, potentially super useful players, and the depth of it. I'm just thinking off the top of my head of 4 to 5 guys in that draft class that could have immediate impacts for them. Way more excited about that rookie class, even more so than I already was, and I was excited when they drafted these guys. Now, I did want to talk about the impact of the Brevin Jordan and C.J. Gardner-Johnson injuries just real quick because, like, I think that neither guy is like gonna be in the Pro Bowl or be All Pro or anything like that. But I think both very unique players, specific to the Texans at their positions and what they wanted to do. I think it was Dalton Schultz, the Texans' top tight end, Dalton Schultz, who was talking about how those top three guys in that tight end room really complement each other between Schultz, Cade Stover, and Brevin Jordan, right? All kind of different players. Schultz is a little bit more of like the new age, prototypical tight end who doesn't necessarily block great, but is, kind of an optimal pass catching option at that position. Too big to be a receiver, but can still run and catch really well. That's kind of what tight ends are now. Like they used to be more traditional, bigger, stronger, like, like just smaller linemen, whatever. Cade Stover fits a little bit more of that mold. Former linebacker, uh, farm kid, like just tough as nails, and still relatively new to the position, but has some skills that he's trying to hone in on and trying to improve in the passing game, but just like has the toughness that you want, the attitude that you want from that position. Kind of a little bit more of a throwback. And then Brevin Jordan, really just a tweener, like listed as a tight end, but not doesn't really have a position. Just like running, catch the ball, catch the ball and run the ball, run and catch and run. Like that's line them up at tight end, line them up at H back, just line them up in the slot, like, but figure out a way to get him the ball. So he's much more of like the tweener, but also I think their most explosive option at that position. Especially like coming back from the torn ACL now, torn ACL plus whatever this knee injury is that's going to put him, it's ended his 2025 season before it began and put him on the season injured reserve list. Like I don't know what his future looks like now, unfortunately, and I can only wish him the best, both health wise, or I should say, physical health, mental health, financial health. Like, I know a lot of people don't feel sorry for the professional athletes, especially once they cashed a few professional checks. But like, this changes is earning potential and like life trajectory in some ways. So, I'm thinking about the guy, Brevin Jordan. I think it's just worth noting is one of the more pleasant people on that team. Like one of the more pleasant people to talk to, be around. Just a real joy. Has a really like childlike joy for the game, for life, fun loving. Never been around Brevin Jordan and like the mood was down. Um, I was just say for these injury situations, but like just a stand-up dude and a very unique player and useful player to this offense that, now I don't know what his future looks like, but I can only wish the best for him. As far as the Texans go, they are now down a weapon. Like, we don't have to sit here and oversell what Brevin Jordan meant or means to the offense, but he was definitely a weapon. He was a weapon. They don't have him anymore, and that obviously sucks. I think they're still going to use tight ends, obviously, but they're going to be without. They don't have another guy like Brevin Jordan. Like they don't have a next man up. Let's replicate Brevin Jordan. I, Again, not trying to oversell him as a player, just how unique and specific he is. Unique and specific, like in a vacuum, and then unique and specific to this team. I think it does matter that he's not going to be there. I thought it mattered last year that he wasn't there, and I think it'll matter a little bit this year. It's just not going to make or break their season, but they are down a real legitimate weapon that they had in Brevin Jordan. So wishing him the best and hoping that the Texans have, and I'm sure they do have like contingency plans on. Got to scrap the Brevin Jordan plays. What are you going to replace him with or lean more into? Because like I said, you're not going to necessarily replace that player. I mean, it's not an irreplaceable player; it's just a very specific player. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, though, on a lighter note, injury at the Greenbrier looked like it was. It looked like it could also be seasoned. This was before Brevin Jordan. it looked like it could be season ending. There was even some reporting out there, and it was ended up being not the correct reporting and was corrected, but it caused a little bit of confusion for a little while that he had a torn ACL and his season could be over. And it looks like his season is not over. It looks like he might even be back in time for the season to start. Now, I got a hard time going from carted off the field to going to be ready for week one. Carted off the field in the week leading up to the first preseason game, and then on the field several weeks later, just a few weeks later for week one. Now that's optimal. That would be great if that ends up being the case. But I got a tough time like relying on that. I know D'Amico Ryan said he'd be all right, and that he'd be back. That's good news because it's clearly not as bad as it looked and as they perhaps once feared. But I gotta assume that they're gonna be without him for a little while, or could be without him for a little while. Who knows if he's 100% whenever he does get back? Maybe he's just practicing to start the season, and they ease him in there a couple of games in. We'll see. I know we don't have an exact timeline for C.J. Gardner-Johnson. It's just the opposite in terms of the prognosis of severity and prognosis. Like one guy's season is over, and another guy looks like it's not only going to be back for the season, but early in the season. So that is it feels like they dodged a little bit of a bullet because I wasn't exactly sure what they were going to do at safety. I saw that they signed Jalen Mills. I know that MJ Stewart has some experience, has plenty of experience, really. But that to me, when Kalen Bullock early in training camp goes up there and says that this is the best secondary in football, like obviously Kalen Bullock himself stands out as somebody that had whatever it was 5 interceptions last year. Derek Stingley Jr. as an All-Pro, Kamari Lassiter as to me is about as good of a second corner as you can get. Like a second corner with number one corner energy, and possibly could be a number one corner with. I mean, hopefully we never have to even figure that out, and they just have both of these guys forever. But like, you could do a lot worse than that. And just quite frankly, you give me a team full of Kamari Lassiters, like for sure. So you got those guys, those three guys, but then C.J. Gardner-Johnson. And never mind, Jalen Petrie is your slot linebacker, safety hybrid, whatever the hell. Like, just kind of put him on the field and, like, kind of have him near the line of scrimmage and let his instincts take over. You put all these guys together, and, these are guys that are returning from last year, and you add C.J. Gardner-Johnson into the mix. That, to me, is what takes it from a really strong secondary, one of the better secondaries in the league, to in contention for best secondary in the league. So without him, that's called into question if it's the best secondary in the league. So great that he's going to be back. That was a scary moment, but glad that he's going to be back. I think he's going to be a big part of the team. He was one of the, you remember, check out the last podcast, whenever the hell that was that I did that. He's one of the guys, if not the guy, that I was most looking forward to watching in training camp or at training camp. So, yeah, man, look, we've done an hour already. I've rambled on for an hour already and didn't even get to the controversial C.J. Stroud emotions and like this whole conversation that's being had around it. I don't necessarily even want to participate in this conversation if I'm just being honest with y'all. Like if I'm just being 100% real with y'all. But since I've already gone an hour, I will revisit this and come back to this in the next episode. C.J. Stroud showing emotion when teammates get injured and there being conversations about it. And then those conversations apparently like offending people and having folks write about it and like we'll talk. We'll talk. I do have opinions on this. I just didn't like if it wasn't for the uproar or outcry, I wouldn't really even feel the need to address it. And I'm not even sure how much I talked about this really after Tank Dell got injured in Kansas City last year. And C.J. was crying on the field, and because it was a little bit of a conversation then, and I think it dovetails into the conversation now in his reaction to the Brevin Jordan injury. But let this just be a tease, okay? Let this be a tease for the next episode where I'm gonna try to stake my claim now. Okay, let's stake the claim now of what that episode is going to be about. We're going to talk about C.J. Stroud. We're going to talk about this odd conversation, maybe even more so odd reaction to the conversation. I think all of it is odd about him showing his emotions when his friends get hurt. But we'll also talk some Astros. We'll also talk some college football because I got some thoughts. Y'all probably see my setup here if you got me on YouTube. And make sure that you check out the D-Block Podcast on YouTube because we're having a good time over there. But you probably see the setup, man. I'm a Texas fan. Texas pretty high in the poll. Could this be the year? Arch Manning. Correa's back. Correa's back with the Astros. We got some juice and some things to actually talk about with the baseball team in town and college football team that I root for. So make sure you subscribe. Make sure that you rate, review, tell your people about the podcast. You can check us out wherever it is you get your podcast. You can also find us on YouTube. I mentioned Foolish Club Media earlier in the show. Make sure that you check them out on all podcast platforms and YouTube as well. Mentioned earlier that I'll be on the drive later this week. I will come back and mention that again. But in case this is the only episode you hear between now and then, Thursday and Friday on the drive, 2 to 6 p.m. Central, Sports Radio 610. It should be a time. But until then, and until next time, y'all be good.
Swinging down west time and throw the deuces in the sky. Sam Houston represent you other cats irrelevant. He be at the press conference getting all the questions in. 610 represent, you know how he do it. Beast guy from Hiram Clark, do it. Beast guy from Hiram Clark, 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 Beast guy from Hiram